What I'm doing today is I'm going to fulfill my obligation to respond to a number of postings that have been put onto the above top secret website in response to the impromptu interview that I conducted at the Bay Area UFO Expo on Saturday the 12th of 2009, and during the time that I was invited to conduct this impromptu interview, the camera was set up in such a way that I had about 5 minutes that I was initially given and a standing position in which to tell whatever story that I felt was relevant to ufology. In responding to that, I was allowed to go on as my story appeared to be interesting, and I was given the email for Mark Springer, apparently the manager for the above top secret website. But that email that I was given apparently has proven to be ineffective in terms of receiving any of the electronic correspondence which has been sent. I've gone through the efforts to contact Above Top Secret through their telephone number and through their general website email address, but no response has been forthcoming, and I've certainly asked for the opportunity to be interviewed at length. So since I haven't been given the opportunity to do that, I feel obligated to respond to a number of the postings on the website via YouTube. And it's important to understand that my own website, certainly at this point in history, is thewormholes.org, and there will be postings giving far more detailed explanations of my experiences throughout my various careers on thewormholes.org, but we're going to respond specifically, as succinctly as possible, to the various questions that or challenges that have been posted on the above top secret website for now. Concerning Slayer 69's first opinion that the balloon bombs were not effective, this is the denial of the reality of the heroism of the African Americans who were organized into the Triple Nickels, the 555 Smoke Jumpers group, and to the public service volunteers who actually were not volunteers but actually conscientious objectors who were press ganged into smoke service, firefighting service in the Smoke Jumpers organization that they were a part of. In response to the enormous firestorms created by Japanese balloon bombs. I had already emphasized in the short speech that I was allowed to give how they were impacting America strategically by cutting off electricity to the atomic bomb project, the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos, which received all of its power hydroelectrically from the dams up north. And as these fires raged and continued to tear down power lines, it was up to these smoke jumpers to dampen out the fires long enough so that the power lines could be basically reconnected. And in terms of how the smoke jumpers suffered, they suffered in a number of ways, not only from the immediate danger, but from any lack of publicity concerning what they were dealing with, and also any lack of medals or recognition or any military benefits, since none of them were part of a formal military service as the Coast Guard would be. They were deemed as civilian employees and were not liable for the kind of injury benefits that, say for instance, are supposedly offered to a veteran. So in terms of the, it's important to remember that these units were racially segregated, that we were speaking of an extremely racist time. It was a time that was so racist that when an African American whose life was written about in a novel called The Human Stain, whose name at the moment I do forget, was responsible for basically isolating the ability to freeze blood plasma into a mode of transportability where it could be used on the front. This same African-American doctor was ordered not to mix African-American blood with Caucasian blood, and indeed all African-American blood was ordered to be destroyed and not to be distributed for use in terms of plasma use on the front. So this level of racism was quite virulent then, and is unfortunately, as exposed by many of these postings, extremely prevalent now. In terms of moving on for the railroad workers that he claims that people saw who were Chinese in the United States, we have to remember that the United States at that time, where the railroads were being developed, had classified all of these areas as a frontier, and they were indeed extremely underpopulated. And before the railroads were built, transportation from one area of the West to the more populated East was extremely difficult. This is why people were going in wagon trains. This is why people were dying along the way. This is why the Mormons still celebrate the difficulties of their exodus from their persecution on the East Coast to Desiree in the middle of the United States, fighting the U.S. government all the way as guerrillas that was given orders in certain states to eradicate them from the earth, literally genocide orders. So if anyone is in doubt of this, they can ask the Church of the Latter-day Saints themselves for the records pertaining to this. And these people were white. So in terms of the ability to move to the West, they had enormous casualties just on the road itself. This is why we were building the railroads, and the railroads were handed, in terms of the most dangerous work, in terms of the highest casualty work, to people who were considered less than human, i.e. the Chinese. This is where the term "not a Chinaman's chance" came from. Chinese people who were under white supervision were given sticks of dynamite to blow out the sides of mountains so that they could tunnel through for the tunnels for the railroads to access, and the white supervisors would always give them a dynamite that had no wick. So as soon as they lighted it, they would blow. And so the Chinese would die literally by the hundreds, and ultimately by the thousands, and ultimately by the tens of thousands in building America's railroads, because they were considered as non-human and expendable. So if they recognized Chinese, it would only be as a subhuman species in the United States. And for anyone to say otherwise is obviously stinking of the same revisionism which Slayer 69 claims that I am presenting to him. So in terms of the broadcast, B-R-O-A-D-C-A-S-T-E, when this person claims that they have seen museums where they talk about the impact of the bomb, the museums are there to honor the dead in terms of the civilian casualties of America's nuclear attacks. When I speak of foreigners surrendering, this is hardly some form of revisionism. This happens to be a fact. If you don't believe this, you can ask the Australian government themselves, because that is where the camps existed specifically for Japanese prisoners of war who had been captured unconscious or too wounded to resist. So when these Japanese prisoners of war were brought to Australia, they always charged the machine gun nest whenever they awoke. They always pulled the IVs out of their arm. They always wrapped the razor wire around themselves so that they could bleed out. And the Australians were so impressed with this auto-destructiveness on a mass scale by the Japanese that they actually invited the Emperor's son, who is currently the Emperor, Emperor Heisei, to Australia so that he could honor the war dead in Australia.